lovelies, and welcome back to the Ages of Chaos. Now, those of you who listen to this channel in general, not just the Fluff and Hammer stuff, but everything that I do, you should know by now that I'm a sucker for the villains. I'm a sucker for the antagonists. I go woozy for the bad guys. I love my villains, as do a lot of queer people. There's a whole discussion to be had about why that is, but it is the case. We tend to see ourselves in them quite a lot. And I've always, ever since I was a kid, ever since I was a child, I've always favored the bad guys. I always knew the relatives who knew me well come Christmas or birthday time, because the ones who didn't would get me Autobots instead of Decepticons. They would get me, what are they called? Celestial Knights instead of Darkling Lords. They would get me the good guys instead of the bad guys. And I have never, ever been interested in the good guys. I was the kid who, in 1986, okay, I was 2, so, I saw the movie a bit later. But when I first saw Transformers the movie on VHS, a few years later, I didn't give a fig about Optimus Prime dying, or Prowl, or Ironhide, or Brawn, or any of the others. I thought it was kind of cool. I did care about Megatron getting whacked, kind of, or transitioning into Galvatron. I did care about Kickback getting his head smashed in by Cup. I did care about the Decepticons who died. Thundercracker. Oh, I know he got turned into Scourge, but hey, even so, it's sad. It's sad not to see him anymore, my little blue boy. So it shouldn't be a surprise to you that it's exactly the same in 40k. Well, to be fair, in 40k, it's difficult not to, because there are no good guys, as anyone who understands the universe, the satire of it, will understand. I mean, there are no good guys in 40k. The ones who are kind of the protagonist factions are the worst fascists in all of history. They even the best of them outshines any historical fascist regime you can name in terms of the genocides that they commit. So, no, there are no good guys in 40k. And those who assert otherwise, you really want to be careful of them, because they probably think that Andrew Tate is a good guy too. They probably think that Nigel Farage or Donald Trump is a good guy, and you don't want that. Because those people are fucking idiots and morons and lunatics and very bad people. Anywho, I love me the characters who are advertised within the bounds of the universe as the villains. The Chaos factions, obviously, a lot of the Xenos factions, but you know who my favorite is? My absolute favorite in not only in 40k, but actually in the entire hobby. My favorite character of them all. I may have mentioned it on the main show actually, so this may not come as much of a surprise. It's Ahriman. Azek Ahriman of the Thousand Sons. Ah, Ahriman, oh my Ahriman. I love him. I love Ahriman so much. I've loved him ever since he was originally introduced. Way back when, back in the Realms of Chaos days, there was no Ahriman. That took a while to develop. The Thousands, there was no rubric either, because there were no rubricae. None of that had happened at that point in the Thousand Sons history. They were one of the first Chaos Legions, or chapters as they were back then, to be introduced and detailed. But their history was rather truncated, and it only included things like Magnus being censured by the Emperor for continuing his practice of sorcery, the subsequent invasion of Prospero by the Space Wolves, the flight of the Thousand Suns into the Warp, and all of that gubbins. Magnus eventually becoming a demon prince of Zeech, the planet of the sorcerers, that stuff was in there, but it was all very bare bones. There was no Ahriman, there was no rubric. I don't think there was any mention of the flesh curse, actually, because it wouldn't have been a thing to the Thousand Sons back then. They were totally dedicated to Zeech. They didn't really have much in the way of alternative motivation. They would have probably liked it. They'd have been quite happy about the flesh curse back then, as some of them still are. As some of them still are in the present day. I mean, that's the thing about Thousand Sons. Like all the Chaos Space Marine legions, they've become very complicated, and there are lots of sub-factions and sub-cults and characters with different agendas and beliefs and ideologies. and so on. It's what makes them so wonderful, makes them so, so wonderful. Ahriman was introduced in the second edition Chaos Space Marine Codex, and he is part of a coterie of characters who, if you read the design notes by Andy Chambers and Jarvis Johnson, I believe, in the second, they're actually in the second ed Chaos Space Marine Codex as a sort of article. They talk about the design philosophy of the second ed codex, and what they were really trying to do is move the faction away from how it was presented in Realms of Chaos. In Realms of Chaos, the legions, the Chaos Space Marines themselves, didn't have much in the way of individual motivation or ideology. They were subsumed by their gods. Their beliefs were the aspects of their chaos powers, and that was it. They didn't really have their own alternative agendas or ideologies or modus operandi or character, really. So, in most of certainly the cult Chaos Space Marine factions, they introduced these characters. They introduced the likes of Fabius Bile in The Emperor's Children, a renegade from his own legion who emphasizes a very different quality or aspect of the Emperor's Children. They introduce Khan the Betrayer into the World Eaters, who again represent something very particular about his legion. And for the Thousand Sons, they introduced Ahriman, and he was only Ahriman back then. He wasn't called Azek. He wasn't called Azek until the Horus Heresy books, I don't think. Just as the planet of the sorcerers wasn't named, it wasn't called Sorciarius back then. It was just called the planet of the sorcerers, which is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? It's a bit difficult to sort of work into a sentence and make poetic and interesting. Planet of the sorcerers, you know. Sorciarius is great. It's way better, isn't it? Sorciarius, planet of the sorcerers. Right? It's lovely. Ahriman, and Ahriman was introduced to make the faction a little bit different, to demonstrate how, not only to demonstrate something about the Thousand Sons, but to demonstrate something about the nature of being a puppet of Zeech. The thing about Ahriman is that from the very beginning he did never accepted his damnation, and he can't. Ahriman is the antithesis of Magnus in many respects, the utter antithesis of him. Magnus surrenders in absolute extremis, when he has lost everything, when everything he believed in collapsed in around him, Magnus surrendered. He surrenders to Zeech. He surrenders to fate. He basically comes to believe, as a lot of the Thousand Sons do, that there's no escaping Zeech. No living thing can escape Zeech. There's no defying fate. So you may as well just go with it. You may as well just be whatever the fates want you to be. And that's Magnus. That's Magnus. That's the ultimate irony of Magnus the Red. He has been subsumed. His will, his arrogance, his power, all of it doesn't mean anything because he's ultimately just a puppet of fate. He's a puppet of Zeech. The chief puppet, yeah. The most beloved and useful of his puppets, yeah. But ultimately, still just a puppet. Whereas Ahriman, it doesn't matter what happens to Ahriman. It doesn't matter what life or fate or Zeech throws at him. He never will accept that. He won't accept that there is a prescribed destiny for him. He won't accept the shackles of fate. He is fantastic in that regard. And it's not because he's ignorant or arrogant. That's another interesting thing about Ahriman. He is arrogant. Don't get me wrong. He is completely arrogant. But he understands this. Certainly, if you read the later novels by John French, and if you take them as read, Ahriman is aware of this fact. He is totally aware of what's happening around him, but he's seeking a means of undoing it. He's seeking a means of getting away from it, even after 10 millennia. 10 millennia of failure, not just failure, but catastrophic failure. I mean, my co-host Adam said recently, and he's absolutely right. If there were a 40k equivalent of Teclis from the Lumineth or the High Elves as they once were in 40k, it is Ahriman. It is Azek Ahriman. He means well. Ahriman is always trying to defy fate. He's always trying to defy the prescribed destiny that's around him. And every time he does, he both succeeds and fails spectacularly. So the rubric is probably the best example of this. The rubric of Ahriman. He tried to save his legion. He did his best to save his legion from the flesh curse that was claiming them. Of course, Magnus at that point didn't care about it because it was just another marker of the favor of Zeech, or rather, it was another expression of the fate that Zeech had assigned to them. So, of course, he wouldn't try to stop it. Whereas Ahriman is like, no, I'm not having that. I'm not having that at all. He will not have his legion of scholars and sorcerers and intellects end in abomination. He wouldn't have it. And there are others who also wouldn't have it in the Thousand Sons, his cabal. And so he created a conspiracy to stop it. The rubric, the greatest spell ever. And it is the greatest spell ever. The rubric of Ahriman is like, it is the think of D&D and think of the ultimate spell in D&D. What is the ultimate spell in D&D? What's the spell that is the most powerful? So powerful, in fact, that you can't just take it for your wizard or your sorcerer or whatever. It has to be part of a campaign. It's so profound, it has to be part of a campaign. And it normally has to occur at the end of a campaign. It's so powerful. What is it? It's the wish spell. Obviously, it's the wish spell. You get that one chance to rearrange reality, to change everything. And that is what the rubric is. It wasn't just designed to stop the flesh curse. I mean, this is extrapolation from John French's novels, by the way. But it wasn't just designed to stop the curse. Even Ahriman doesn't really know how it works. He just knows that it's possible. What it does, the rubric, for one instant, in that one moment that it's cast, the caster has the ability to rewrite reality, to change something fundamental in reality. But just like the wish spell, it's a bit of a monkey's paw thing. Because unless you are ridiculously specific, it will twist what you say or want or intend into something awful. And that's exactly what it does, right? The original rubric it reduces the legion to the rubricae. This legion of scholar warriors, it turns them into mindless suits of animated armor. Oh, the flesh change has stopped. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No more abomination for the Thousand Sons, no more mutation, because they're not going to have any flesh for it to happen to, are they? They are, as Ahriman himself said. I mean, it was probably just like anger and arrogance and defiance, but he says in the aftermath to Magnus the Red, when Magnus comes and says, "What the fuck have you done?" Ahriman says to him, I have rendered them immortal in the truest sense of the word. I have ended their curse forever. Of course, he doesn't mean it. He really regrets what the rubric did. And he spent the last 10,000 years trying to undo it. And he has met with disgrace and exile and failure after failure after failure after failure. If you read John French's novels, all it is Ahriman finding a means of undoing the rubric and fucking it up. Completely fucking it up. Or rather, Zeech fucking it up. Because here's a funny thing about Ahriman that John French establishes, which I think is fantastic. Ahriman is like Raziel from the Soul Reaver Legacy of Kain games. You know how in those games, Raziel is the only character with free will? All of the others, all entities, all living things are bound to an entity that's actually quite Zeechan, the Wheel of Fate. They are bound to this elder god called the Wheel of Fate, who is effectively Zeech. And all souls are prisoners. They are all condemned to these endless cycles of death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth, life. And it just keeps going on and on forever. They're all condemned to that, except Raziel. Raziel has free will. Ahriman is like that. Zeech loves Ahriman, absolutely loves him, because Ahriman is the only creature in all, not just the 40k universe, but in any universe, in any permutation of any universe ever, that Zeech can't determine the destiny of. He doesn't know what Ahriman is going to do. And far from making him angry, for Zeech, that's catnip. For Zeech, that's like, oh, I love you. You are so entertaining. You are like the most entertaining creature in all of creation. I love you so, so much. So he is, despite everything that he does, he is the most beloved of Zeech. He is this champion of Zeech, whether he likes it or not. Zeech just finds him fascinating. He's watching him through his crystal ball or whatever, and he's like, "What are you? What are you? What are you gonna do? You are so much more interesting than all the other things out there who I know about. You know, I know what their fates are because I've seen it a million times over. I've seen every permutation of the paths they take. In fact, I already exist in the probabilities where they've taken that path. So they bore me. They're so boring to an immortal, omnipotent entity like me. However, you are not. You, I love. You're so interesting. You disrupt my plans. You change the weave of fate all around you. You alter things. You disrupt things. And you know, I kind of love that because that's me. That's what I'm about. So, Ahriman is actually, despite the fact that he himself despises Zeech, he absolutely despises Zeech and chaos. And he wants, like Fabius Bile, he wants the gods dead. He wants humanity liberated from the gods. He hates them, but he makes use of them. Of course he does. He has no choice. He makes use of them. His whole thing, Ahriman, is that this is where he differs from Fabius Bile. Fabius Bile is a secularist by nature. He's also a materialist. He wants a totally material universe. Fabius Bile. Fabius Bile wants to recreate humanity and the sentient creatures in the universe such that the warp becomes becalmed, the gods lose their connection to humanity and the sentient creatures in the universe, and thus die. They just become inert vortices of warp energy and nothing else. That's what Fabius Bile wants. Ahriman has a slightly different take on this. Ahriman is a metaphysician because he's a sorcerer, right? He uses the warp and he understands it. Ahriman, like Magnus before he became a slave to Zeech, he believes that it's possible to usher in a kind of metaphysical renaissance for humanity. He believes that it's possible to change the warp actively, to either chain, harness, or change the nature of the gods and of demons and angels and whatever, and make them the puppets, the slaves of humanity, rather than the other way around. And that's his deal. That's his whole thing. It's I mean, you know, as it goes, as agendas go, it's pretty badass. It's even more profound than like say, I mean, Abaddon's is quite simple. Abaddon's agenda is relatively simple, you know. He wants to destroy the Emperor, destroy the Imperium, and establish a new empire. That's it. That's kind of it for Abaddon. Whereas Ahriman, Ahriman wants wholesale metaphysical rearrangement of the cosmos. He wants to change the fundamental nature of reality and everything beyond reality as well. It's that there's that arrogance coming in, right? And you know what the funny thing is? The funny thing? He might be able to do it. He's the guy who, where it's like, you know, yeah, he fucks up. Yeah, he fails, but you know what? He never stops. That's the thing. He never bloody stops. No matter how many times he fails, no matter how many times and profoundly he gets it wrong. And I've just read the latest John French Ahriman, by the way. And boy, does he screw up in that one. Oh my God, he screws up so badly. And his mistakes really come back to haunt him, I can tell you. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He's going to keep going. He's going to keep going, and that's why Zeech loves him, because that's Zeech to a T. He favors those who will not submit. He makes use of those who submit, like Magnus, but he's not that interested in them. He's far more interested in the likes of Ahriman, who will not submit. They will try to change their fates always and forever. They will never stop. They will never submit. And that's what's so brilliant about Ahriman. That's what's so brilliant about him. In many respects, he's everything that Nurgle despises. He is self-will. He's the lack of ability to submit, even in the face of absolute truth. Ahriman will be like, you know what? If that's absolute truth, I'm going to change it. I'm going to rewrite truth. Fuck you. That's Ahriman. He's so cool. That's what's so brilliant about him. Okay, he's quixotic. I mean, like, he could show Don Quixote a few things about being quixotic, let's be honest. He's trying to defy the gods. He's trying to defy fate itself, the nature of reality. I mean, how can you not go for that? It's so brilliant. It's so wonderful. And certainly in the novels, it's increasingly hard to paint him as a bad guy in the setting. It's increasingly hard to paint him as a bad guy. Does he have a list of atrocities as long as a million people's arms linked together? Yes, he does. Yes, he does. 10,000 years worth of atrocity, actually. Does he have any more atrocities to his name than most Space Marine legions? Not really. Or chapters? Not really. No. And at least he's doing it for a reason. Outside of, yeah, we're like genetically conditioned and psychologically warped, mega fascists. He's got an actual agenda. He, unlike almost everyone else in the setting, is genuinely trying to change things. He's genuinely he's the revolutionary. He's the one who's trying to change everything. And I can't help but go for that. I can't help but go for that. If I had to throw my oar in with someone in the 40k universe, it'd probably be Ahriman. It'd probably be Ahriman because I believe in what he's trying to do. He's trying to change things. He's trying to change the setting of the universe. And I get that. I understand that. As someone who's wanted nothing but a change in the status quo since he was first started to become sentient, how can I not go for that? How can anyone not go for that who operates on the margins, who wants that change themselves, right? How can anyone not go for that? He is iconic in that regard. He's emblematic of something very profound within the revolutionary heart. And that's what makes him so wonderful. That's what makes him so poetic. Yeah, my favorite character in 40k, Azek Ahriman. Love him.